Workers who got their bosses fired. How? Management was given an injured worker crap, not wanting to pay him, accusing him of gold bricking. Workers said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here or you'll be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." Worker called the EPA and APCD, told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation, all because you wanted to screw with one poor bastard. Story 2. Not my story, but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. I don't know what else to call it. People came to her for help raising money for nonprofits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago, before social workers were more of a mandatory thing at high schools. My high school was very poor and did not have one. So my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal, who flat out refused, just saying the position wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided she would donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party, and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said it was such a terrible shame that the principal didn't take the money for the social worker's position. The superintendent was dumbstruck, and then told her that he ordered the principal to find funding for that position, and when superintendent asked him about it, he replied with, "No one is interested in that, and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position, and when we came back from holiday break, the school was hiring for his position. Story 3. Worked register at a tour company. I also had a manager who frickin' hated me for some reason. She was probably the most annoying person I've ever met. Constantly yelled at us for no reason, got on to me about answering questions a new hire had when I was asked, not her, wrote down I was 30 minutes late for a shift when I was 2 minutes late, etc., etc. We had a sneaking suspicion that she was taking money from our tills, as she was always the one who counted down the till when someone got fired for stealing cash. I made it a habit to count down every bill when I gave it back to a customer, because we would get pay docked if we were even $1 off. So if a customer had $23 in change, I would count 20, 1, 2, 3 in front of them. So I knew I'd given back the right amount. We also had cameras pointing at the registers. Well, one day my GM pulls me aside and says $20 was missing from my till, and they were going to fire me. I straight up told my boss she could look at all the cameras because I counted out all my bills for the customers. Lo and behold, crappy manager was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. Screw you, Jennifer. I won. Story 4. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial abuser of female clients / criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to his annual bar fees, but even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over a 6-period month. OP is out here working real justice. Hell yeah, OP. This is just a gross abuse of a power position in a way, and he deserves a lot worse than to be disbarred, in my opinion. But it's a start. Story 5. Mine is pretty pedestrian, but very satisfying. I was working in a garden center. I'd been there for a long time and was woefully overqualified for the job I'd been doing, and was therefore very valuable in that position. Think ops manager skills at admin assistant position and pay. We lost our sales manager one year and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a real piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person she was instantly and constantly rude and strident and mean and curt and dismissive and that attention-seeking brand of lazy where she threw her weight around without cause. Oh, and she talked crap about anyone not in the room and collected 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess, but it's way easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach a jerk horticulturist how to be a human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her, so she stayed. With one thing and another, I got another job. This process was slightly accelerated by Flora, but only a little. I'd been looking for some time, mostly waiting for the right opportunity. When I gave my 2 weeks notice, I got an email the next day scheduling my exit interview with the head of PR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews. Only managers and sometimes department supervisors did. Everyone at my store knew why I was leaving, so there was literally no reason for the store manager to pull strings to get me one. And he never said anything about it, but I knew. He set it up so I could tell the head of HR, a man I was very friendly with, that I was leaving because of Flora. And I did just that. I laid into her. I said that floor was the only reason I was leaving after almost 10 years with the company, during which time I wrote the company's health and safety program, trained almost every other person who did my job at other stores, made spreadsheets that got used company-wide, as well as setting audit records that still stand to this day, and all for a few pennies over minimum wage. I said I was going because she was the worst and I couldn't take it anymore. I found out later she was let go. I was thanked by most of my old workmates. My manager never said a word about it to me then or since. He was a real OG. Story 6. For a while I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer could not be satisfied, no matter how many people, how much attention, or how we bent over for them. Our program's director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer, and instead just hammered his employees to do more and more and more. People on our team were being let go due to failure, or quitting outright due to burnout, and he was complaining he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as General Dog's Body, I happen to have the ear of our VP, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny that if the director was doing his job, how many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later, I heard the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. Story 7. I used to be a store manager at a sneaker/sporting goods store in the mall. One of my co-managers was banging one of my teenage underage employees in that back stockroom after the store closed on a regular basis. This was going on for several months, apparently. I found out when said teenager came to me and said that my co-manager promised her a raise that she never got. I asked her why he said that he would give her a raise. That is when she told me about banging in the stockroom. I had to call the police and corporate about this. We arranged a sting with the help of the girl. Basically planned a meet up with my co-manager after work that the police went to. Essentially, caught him with his pants down. I don't know what consequences there are for this. I mean, I know it's statutory, obviously, so that's some pretty good punishment on the line there, hopefully. And also, I'm not sure what the term would be. Coerced, in a way? Tricked? I don't know. Either way, it's not looking good for him, and I don't think it should. Story 8. Was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors are open, you get the hell off the ice. Some jerk decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss, because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I feel okay." Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Well, since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration, because I felt there should be some sort of documentation or paper trail in case, God forbid, I end up having a brain hemorrhage or something a few days later. The boss was fired by my next shift. Story 9. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one/mentorship meeting, my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said I wanted to do back-end work. This was a programming internship. He replied and said, "Girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the QA path? You'll do better there." At the time, I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought that I would be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened to me, but instead I was silent, because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a few weeks and I was out to lunch with a few coworkers who brought along a lady who had worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract for a while, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss, and some of the stuff he had done or said to them, mostly rude things. So I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she would take care of it. Within a few days, he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later, and I loved it. As I understand it, I was not the first person to have serious complaints about him, only the last. Story 10. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't in months. She and my director ordered me and my coworkers to do our own chart audits, fill out the forms, and they would sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision, staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us and invariably someone cried due to the stress and lack of support, and not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing and their job. I refused. I was told to do it or I would be fired. Nope. So I got fired. On the way out to my car, I called my former director who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what had happened at the interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of the previous agency, so she called her and I told her everything too. Director was fired and supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had just destroyed any chance of promotion and left shortly afterwards. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Story 11. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happen to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make intimate comments about trios. Ew. And asked what hotel we picked for our afternoon delight, stuff like that. It was so frickin' uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Problem was, supervisor was one of the guys and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted. Told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation which took 3 days. They interviewed staff. They corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras, saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking, and was fired. When he was told, he guessed that I was the person who complained, and tried to get me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my coworkers surrounding me as he was walled out. That was a lovely ending to it all. Story 12. He was always slacking off. He'd go into a 15-minute task and be gone 2 hours. He'd have to shoot off early for a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, always with no prior warning and whenever he was obviously bored. This was, mind you, within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and went along with it for a while. My colleague was in her 40s and vaguely knew him anyway, so was not standing for it. She reported him repeatedly to our area manager, who decided to come down to speak to him about it. Area manager called in the morning, told him to stay in the shop today and send one of us out for anything that needed doing. He said he had something he needed to do, but the boss said, nope, need you in the shop. Somehow he didn't get the obvious message and went out anyway. The area manager came down and he was gone. The manager wouldn't answer his phone all day. Area manager was mad. At the end of the day, when we were closing up, he walked past, posted his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even attempt to argue his case. Story 13. My manager at a new job, let's call him Leo, offered to give me a ride home after a Friday night shift went overly long. Instead of turning onto my street, he went to a bar about a mile in the opposite direction so we could get to know each other. I had one drink and asked to go home. Instead, he bought me a second drink. I asked to go home again and he tried to assault me. The details aren't important. Let's just say he was pretty aggressive. I emailed the owner of the restaurant about what happened and went to my shift the next day. Owner was outside the restaurant firing the manager, all on the word of a brand new employee he'd never met. I was so impressed, and the rest of the mostly young female staff were very grateful for the change. The restaurant was a great place to work. 2 years later, I started my first day at my dream restaurant. Did some training, sat down for pre-shift with the kitchen, and who comes out to present the specials? Oh, Leo, of course. He sees me and freezes up. After pre-shift, he tried to talk to me about working together, but I went straight to my new manager. I said I have history with a current employee that they need to know about. I tell my story. I show the emails between the owner and myself. They talk to Leo about it, and he is fired again. He worked in a really specialized food style where chefs circulate through all the restaurants. He later applied to work for me when I was the hiring manager and didn't get a call back, obviously. I'm out of the industry now, but I used to dream of getting him fired again. I want to haunt him for the rest of his professional life. I like to imagine people who do this kind of thing can get better. But first of all, I want to say, not likely. And also, I understand that as a victim, you're a little less willing to forgive, which is super valid. Because what happened to you, it happened to you. That can't be taken away even if the other person gets better or whatever. And when it comes down to it, it's pretty easy to, not assault someone. So, you reap what you sow. Story 14. I was working at a gas station. Now, this gas station was a dump. Tiny place that was getting robbed, and occasionally a drive-by would shoot it up. But I was broke and needed the money. I work my first 2 weeks there and payday comes. No paycheck. Okay, fine. Sometimes, because of how timeliness works, it gets put on the next check. Next payday comes and still nothing. So I go talk to the owner, who tells me he's not been able to add me to the payroll and to check back with him tomorrow and my paycheck should be there. Next day rolls around and so does the boss man, who tells me he still hasn't added me to the system, but offers to pay me under the table. Counts out a stack of bills. Now, here's the thing. I'd been keeping track of my hours and he was trying to pay me less than half of what I had earned. So I tell him that he needs to put me in the system and pay me properly, and I ask him if the money he's offering has had the tax deducted and tracked. Boss is surprised that I actually want to pay my income taxes. I remind the boss that tax fraud is a thing, but he didn't care. I got a little heated and demanded he pay me properly or I would go to the labor board. Boss told me to go home and that the labor board won't do anything. So I did it, and with a calm fury I proceeded to unleash hell on that guy. I walk home, and while I do so, I call the labor board, who immediately email me the forms I need that basically said he either paid me what I was owed, or he would be forced to pay me and face some steep fines. Great. But then I have a thought, and I make another call, this time to the CRA, and I let the tax man know everything about him trying to pay me under the table, and they were very interested. A couple weeks pass. I finally get my paycheck, and I learn from several friends who had all worked there that they received a call asking if he had ever paid them under the table, and assuring them that they would not be in trouble if they accepted. Well, of course, all of them had been honest and said he had indeed tried to, and that was the last I heard about it until one day, a few months down the road, I stopped in after noticing a friend of mine was working there. They told me the rest of what happened, as they'd just been hired when it all went down. My call had started an investigation leading to tax fraud/evasion charges. But wait, there's more. Turns out it was discovered that those robberies that kept happening were staged to get insurance money. More fraud. Well, suffice to say, the owner was arrested. Story 15. I quit. I went through everything in my exit interview. How my reviews were always crap so she didn't have to give me a raise, but that I had emails telling me how great that same work was throughout the year. How I was written up because someone heard me say something mean. She couldn't tell me what it was, and she wouldn't repeat it, and HR never heard anything about it. She also did that write-up by herself, instead of with another member of management per the company handbook. She also told me to work 80 hours a week. I refused to, and then got a new job within the week and sent in my 2 weeks. I also talked about how she threatened my job, because I found out about her and a few other people changing reports to get them all of their bonuses. I got to meet with everyone about the crap she was pulling, except for the people that were in on the editing of reports. I met with the COO, CFO, VP of HR, and all of the legal team. After I left, she was immediately moved to another department and then let go of within 3 months. Also, the people that were changing reports were either let go or demoted. I do feel bad for leaving that job, though. Within the year, the department was fully let go, so my friends also lost all their jobs. Story 16. Didn't get my boss fired because he was the owner, but I did screw him out of a high-dollar contract. A little background here, this guy, complete jerk. He treated his customers like crap, so you can imagine how he treated his employees. This was a hydraulic repair shop. We rebuilt hydraulic cylinders, pumps, and custom-made parts, etc. I was a truck driver for this guy and the only one in the shop licensed to drive this truck. The owner wasn't even licensed. Eventually, I got so sick of this jerk and made up my mind to quit, but I waited for the opportune moment to do so. My former boss was in talks with a steel company for a contract to do all of their hydraulic repairs, a contract that would have landed him millions over a period of 10 years. Keep in mind, this guy was the definition of donghead. My last day, I had to make an emergency delivery to said steel mill, and the contract hinged on this delivery. I load up the truck, then went back in, clocked out, and went home. My former boss called complaining why I wasn't there. I told him I'm tired of being treated like a frickin' abused dog and slave, and I quit. I told him good luck trying to get a CDL driver within the next hour, and to screw off, I quit. Well, he changes his tune real quick, because now he was at my mercy, and he didn't want to risk losing this big contract. He must have been desperate, because he offered a raise, which was coming from the guy who never gives raises, meaning he was really in a panic. About a week later, I ran into a former coworker from said hydraulic shop who had quit a week later for the same reasons. This coworker told me the former jerk boss freaked out the whole day, and he lost the big contract. The former coworker also stated that 2 more guys quit within the week, and the former boss couldn't figure out why no one would stay. The former coworker and I laughed and joked, and both of us thought that the former boss will never figure out why no one wants to work for such a complete jerk. Story 17. I can't take credit for getting him fired, but I have a good story. My former manager was a moron. None of my coworkers liked him. He was rude, a bully, and didn't know what he was doing. I made an HR complaint a few months after starting there, so I feel like I helped build a case at least. Found out from long-term workers that he had many reports on his file already for various things, including harassment. One day we were just told he wouldn't be back. He was there the day prior. The complaint that finally got him fired didn't come from me, but you'll love/hate this. In February, he was casually speaking with a Chinese employee about coronavirus, and the manager referred to COVID-19 as Kung Flu. Employee complained and asked for an apology. The manager refused to even apologize, saying he, the employee, could quit if he didn't want to work for him. Yeah, the employee quit, and the manager was fired after several years at the company. Screw that guy. Look, whether you think it's offensive or not, if you're in a professional environment and the guy is just like, hey man, didn't love that, could you just apologize and we'll move past it, and you say no, you're asking for whatever comes next as far as I'm concerned. Like, not only are you kind of an ignorant jerk, you're an ignorant jerk that refuses to even try. Just so stuck in the mindset of you can't be doing anything wrong, so you shouldn't have to change what you're doing. Story 18. My boss had been with the company for around 25 years and was getting very complacent. He would show up around 9 a.m., leave for lunch about 11:30, get back around 1:30, and then sometimes leave by 2 or 3 for the day. It's not like no one noticed this behavior, but they wanted to put him in a position where there was a spotlight on him so he could either get with the program or they would get rid of him. So I was transferred out of that department because I was the one who was doing all of the work. Anyway, a year later, the situation didn't improve, so they let him go and gave me his job. Don't get me wrong, I didn't get him fired. He did that all by himself. But I knew what the plan was, and I didn't share the details with him because I knew how much he made, and I wanted the promotion and raise to go along with it. Story 19. It wasn't just me, it was a team effort. At my old job, we got a new food and beverage director. So he was in charge of our restaurant/bar as well as our conference area. He couldn't care less for the conference area, so he focused his time on the restaurant. Got rid of bussers and made every server become their own bartender. Made a new drink menu and worked with the head chef for a new food menu. Fired the people he didn't like and hired his drinking buddies from old jobs to be servers there. He was an alcoholic, and he would always disappear into his office with a cocktail or a glass of wine and leave us servers out to struggle. I remember one shift in particular, I was scheduled to work lunch and dinner, and I was the only one scheduled during lunch. We were showing the local college football game in our college town, and it just so happened to be our rivals we played that day. Unsurprisingly, every table was full, every bar stool. I even had people standing and just ordering beer from me. My chefs were running my food for me. He comes out from his office to see how things are going. I'm eyeballs deep making drinks and had just finished one of our special drinks. It was the colors of the team. He complimented me on how well I was doing. I turn around and he's gone, and my drink is gone. Didn't see him again until he complained about his table in the restaurant and asked me to take the table. After a few months, everyone hated him, including his friends he had brought with him. On New Year's Eve, we would have a huge party and everyone was expected to work. Even his boss was there. Halfway through the night, he said he had to go home because his wife and daughter were sick. But he had told his friends he was going to a concert right across the street. So he told his boss, went out our wrap-around patio, and sure enough, you could see him with his wife waiting to go in. He didn't return to work. To make up an excuse to ditch work for an event across the street? That's like next level. In a bad way, I mean. I'm not saying this guy was sick. No, he was stupid. Story 20. Hotel manager. My hotel was undergoing a full renovation. During this time, both my managers were putting in less than 30 hours a week, and I was racking up to 70 plus doing their jobs as well. I'm ambitious and knew it would look great on my resume, so was happy to bust my butt. 2 months in, I started to notice things going missing, like furniture, funds allocated by corporate to offset LOR were not used, and just general BS. Found out both my managers were pocketing the $20K in discretionary funds allocated to us when I overheard a conversation in the back office. Reported them to corporate and an investigation was launched. 2 days later, on a Friday, I had been put on suspension for misconduct by our district manager, and Monday, 9 a.m., I was told to clean out my office. I was burnt out at this point, so I took it as a victory, filed a retaliation lawsuit, district manager conducts the investigation with corporate, and moved states. 6 months later, everyone is getting fired, and charges have been pressed on 2 managers. I'm back here eating popcorn. Sad that I was great at my job, but can never work for that company again, though. Story 21. I was working at a large, negatively viewed retailer at the time as an assistant manager. We worked single coverage generally, and I was supposed to work no more than 35 hours. My manager was hourly as well and was at 44 max. He was working roughly 15, but punching in for 48. Came in the mornings even if I was scheduled, took in shipment but didn't process it, then sat in the back. Took the company tablet home with him to take conference calls at home, took me out of view of the cameras and fake punched me and called me a little female dog for asking him to approve my vacation and work his scheduled hours. Overall stand-up guy. I complained to my district manager who told me I must have misread the scenario. I told her I was uncomfortable at work and felt unsafe working with him. She said, "You need to resolve it between you two, as I've never had any problems with him before." He was hired 3 months prior. I'd been with the company for 4 years, so that statement means nothing. So after considering things, I took my complaint to HR. After getting off the phone with our HR rep who told me nearly similar things, that we could have a joint mediation call to try and resolve it, I got a phone call from DM again asking how I could go over her head like that it was disrespectful and insubordination. I left the day before Thanksgiving with no notice. For a specialty retailer, that's a huge blow. I prepped nothing for Black Friday. The entire back room was packed to the ceiling with unprocessed shipment boxes. It was bad. I found out later that my manager was fired for stealing and time card fraud shortly thereafter. The regional manager found out when he had to come in to help the store. Then shortly after that, the district manager was fired for withholding bonus hours for the stores in order to get her bonus for unused hours. And the HR rep for the area was fired the same day for not advocating for employees and taking the district manager's side, who turns out was her childhood friend. I was actually rehired by the same company because they put my termination in incorrectly 4 months later. Those that were still there welcomed me back with open arms, and I got promoted to manager 2 months after that. So glad to be out of that hellhole company though. So the whole time card fraud or whatever, yeah, obviously that's grounds to be fired and everything, but this guy went above and beyond, huh? Straight up punching OP, calling them names for wanting their vacation time approved and to work his scheduled hours. This guy was a power trip and a half. And then everything came tumbling down eventually, huh? And OP got a job back. Nice. An unfortunate string of events, though, because getting caught up in all that is a bunch of problems, I'm sure. But it worked out all right. And on that positive-ish note, that's all the stories we have for today. For now, though, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.